Buongiorno, buon pomeriggio, and buonasera laziali around the world. Sean McIntosh here with Lazio World. It's been a long time coming. We've taken a little bit of a hiatus, but excited to be back, to revamp this thing, to bring it back, to bring more content. Joined by new co-host, Mr. Caleb Adams. Caleb, how we doing?
I'm doing great. I'm super excited for this as a relatively newer Lazio fan. For me, getting more plugged into the community, being more involved, and getting my voice out there is really exciting for me, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and it couldn't be a better episode to kick this thing off with as we talk in large part about Taty Castellanos, a player that both you and I have had the opportunity to see in person. But before we get into that, you mentioned it, young Lazio fan here. It's been fun to see your growth in following Serie A and following this club. What made you choose Lazio? It's obviously it can be a painful ride. So, talk to us a little bit about how you fell in love with this club.
Well, I got to say, I was a bit uh, starting my soccer journey. Obviously, naturally, like most other people, the Premier League was my first introduction into European soccer. I started with MLS. I was primarily an MLS fan, and then I realized later on, like, oh, there's like European soccer. As I got older, I'm like, okay, let me follow this. So it's a bit different than like the typical American. But Premier League was a natural kind of next destination as an English speaker, right? And just because it's on TV. But I got pretty tired of the Prem because just over the years because um, I, the storylines weren't that great. People say it was incredibly competitive, but it like really it wasn't all that competitive as I thought. Like I saw it as like these teams, these giants that would just dominate, continue to dominate, and no one else really got really a shot because of just financially just can't compete. Um, as I started getting a bit tired of the Premier League, I transitioned over to Serie A about 6 years ago now. Is where I really started following Serie A like really religiously, and I fell in love with the tactics of the league. First of all, because teams in the Prem tend to just if they have an issue, they go out and buy it. In Serie A, no, you gotta like tactically adjust for it. You have to compensate somehow. You're not gonna have a top five guy in your position in every position, right? And so it's something that I personally, someone who loves the analytical side of the game, who loves the data side of the game, tactics side of the game, who appreciates that. Serie A is known as the tactical league, right? It's known as the league for tactics for some of the best coaches in the world, some of the great tactical minds in history. And so I started watching Serie A that way, got really into it, and I was always an admirer of Lazio from a distance. It was a team that again didn't spend much money, but had an identity, had some individual players that maybe weren't um, super headlines, like headliner players, but they were great players and like really great players, unique player profiles. And of course, you have some of the greats as well who played for the club, like Nesta, who was a personal favorite of mine, and a long, rich history in Lazio as well. I also had the privilege of going to Rome and getting to know the city as I was doing this kind of journey into Serie A. And so that just kind of even took it to the next level. And so when it came time to choose a team, I didn't want to go. It could have been easy to go for Juventus and stuff, but I'd never been to Turin. And I eventually went with the city that I enjoyed a lot. Also, the blue helped a lot because I come from North Carolina, and the teams here were blue. And so through watching Lazio, the style of play, the individual players that had some of their history, and again, being exposed to it in person, Lazio ended up being my choice.
Well, of course, you made the right one, and we know it's never easy. You talked about the blue, and I think that's a great segue because we're here to talk about a player that was also previously wearing blue,
Yeah.
going to another club here in Rome wearing the blue, and Taty Castellanos coming from NYCFC. Again, great opportunity to talk about a player that we've had the chance to see. And look, this is in pretty standard. Let's just take a step back and talk about the transfer window, the mercato in general for Lazio. A pretty typical transfer window, right? A lot of hype. We qualify for Champions League. The expectations are now really big. on top of that, we sell our best player in Milinkovic-Savic for around 40 million. The expectation is there's a pool of money to spend to reinforce the squad, both in terms of depth and also to bolster some of the positions of weakness in our starting 11. The biggest being the one that Milinkovic-Savic just left. And so Laziali are probably a little bit a little bit of on edge because, like usual, we hope that these players come in while the team is in training camp in Aronzo, particularly because we know how difficult it is to adjust to Sarri's tactics. He's a manager that needs time with his players. He's also a manager that really needs to trust his guys, and there's got to be reps, there's got to be repetition. And so right now, up until the signing of Taty Castellanos just a few days ago, we hadn't had anything coming. And so Taty comes in, big moment, our first signing of the transfer window. Also, one of our biggest signings in club history, I think falling just inside the top 10 and could move up closer to that top 6 range, if all the incentives and bonuses are acquired. I believe the numbers were around 15 million euros. With the opportunity to bump up to around 19 million in terms of that transfer fee. Some expectations come with that. This is a player coming to us from NYCFC of Major League Soccer in New York City, spent this prior season on loan at Girona. When we look at his numbers, right, we know he's a player in Major League Soccer, and we'll talk about what we saw. And I want you to obviously share the tactics, his gameplay, his style. But from a number standpoint, did quite well in Major League Soccer, running away with the Golden Boot Award, had 19 goals in a season that saw NYCFC win MLS Cup. And we know a lot of the stigma with Major League Soccer from those in Europe can see performances like that and question them. But he's a player that saw himself on loan in La Liga, in Girona, who had just seen themselves promoted into the top flight, goes on and scores 13 goals in his first season, keeping them and being a large part of seeing that team land in 10th place in the table. So, I think a player that at least statistically is quite intriguing. Talk to us about his style, first of all. What can Laziali expect from this player? Because again, comes with a relatively large figure. What we paid for him. We know Ciro Immobile. We know his style of play. We know how Sarri likes to play. But Ciro's not a young buck anymore. So what can we expect?
Well, first of all, one thing you forgot to mention, those goals he scored in Girona, 4 of them came against Real Madrid. I mean, this is a guy that has shown that he can compete against the best. That it isn't so much an unproven signing from MLS, first of all. It's a signing that has shown that he can hang, not just hang, but thrive in La Liga. Again, when you're playing as a striker playing on a recently promoted side, you have one of the hardest jobs out there. I mean, strikers that are on these teams that get promoted tend to struggle because they're just sitting back as defensive. Despite that, he's able to make some sort of production, create some sort of production for his team. But Taty, first things first, is his versatility. Okay, so Taty's a player that has said in the past himself that, look, for me, my role, he calls himself, is an attacker. He doesn't even consider himself a striker. He says, I'm just an attacker. He sees the game from a lot of different angles, a lot of different ways, from both the goal scoring side and the assisting side. But from a striker, you can expect someone that works hard, like Ciro, someone who will press hard. He pressed all the time with New York City FC, pressed with Girona as well. And so you get the same sort of work ethic that fans love from Ciro. He has incredible work ethic. He's also really, really intelligent with his movement. Again, like Ciro, this is a guy who finds pockets. He can run in behind. But I would say the biggest difference between him and Ciro is that he loves being on the ball. Like Ciro can hold up. He can link up play. He can do some nice little passes here and there. That's not his biggest strength, but he's capable of it. Taty it thrives it. He loves getting touches on the ball. He loves dropping down, receiving, playing with people. He loves getting touches on the ball. So I would say that'd be the primary difference between like a Cheeto and a Taty. They both have great work ethics, both have great movement, great positioning. And I would say both are quite solid with the weak foot as well. Taty has shown to be a versatile finisher like Cheeto. He can finish, he can curl in a shot from outside the box. He can be more of a poacher and be well positioned to line up these quote unquote tap in goals, right? But that's what we can expect from Taty in terms of a profile.
What do you think his weaknesses are going to be?
His weaknesses, man, I would say he's not an elite finisher. Like, I don't consider Cheeto to be an elite finisher either. He's a guy that really thrives on, I would say, quantity rather than quality. Not saying he's not a good finisher. He does have a good percentage of finishing. However, what makes him dangerous, what makes him so productive, and what made him so productive in MLS was the sheer amount of chances that he produced. And that's another thing that comes with his dribbling is Taty can create his own shots. He can create his own chances. He's a skillful player. He's a really good player on his feet, and he's a skillful player. He can create that separation. And that's part of the reason why he was so productive in MLS is that, hey, even if my team isn't giving me service, I can do it myself. So just the sheer amount of chances that he would create through teammates or for himself is what makes him so productive, So he's that kind of guy. So I would say his weakness is he's not an elite finisher.
Yeah, I mean, look, we know highlight wise, he loves the Rabona. Like he's somebody that is not afraid to go for it big and to do something skillful. I think you mentioned not being an elite finisher, and I think that's important because, right, I think where Cheeto does so well is his ability to create opportunities for himself.
Yeah,
and there are moments where Cheeto may need a couple opportunities to find the back of the net, and that's not that he's not a good finisher, but he's not your Erling Haaland. He's not going to 1-2 opportunities and he's going to bag a brace. Like he is somebody that finds those opportunities for himself. And that is what's impressive with Taty. He is a player that can find space, that can certainly finish inside the box, but I think it's his movement. Let's talk about Sadi and how Sadi loves to incorporate players like that. I think that's a manager that's probably best suited for Taty, is a manager that loves to see his players obviously create movement for himself. How do you see him fitting in with somebody like Sadi?
Well, this is the interesting thing. I mean, I think that first of all, Taty comes from the City group. He comes from Manchester City group. They play a very positive style of soccer, the same way Sadi likes to play. He's used to playing in 4-3-3s, right? I think it'll be a pretty easy transition to come into a team like this that likes to possess, that likes to the positional play, this modern positional play. That's literally what he grew up in the system in. I mean, even throughout his time in Uruguay, when he was playing for Montevideo, which is another team from City Group, they're playing that positive style that Sadi likes to play. And so it should be a really easy transition for Taty to come in and understand and totally get it. I think it'll be really easy. I think that's one of the big reasons why they went out and got him. I mean, it's very clear that not only like him as an individual talent, but I'm assuming we believe that he's also going to be able to fit in very easily into what Sadi wants to do. I do think that Sadi has a little bit extra to work with maybe in terms of possession than like previous strikers he's had. Like he's had Higuain, he's had in this case Immobile, right? And at Chelsea, he had maybe Morata. Who was Morata?
Yeah, I think so.
A lot of these guys are mostly like, I wouldn't say not all out poachers, but they're more position go like the more guys that have really, really smart movement, don't really drop down as much as other strikers out there. Well, in Taty, he may have more of a true false nine type of player if he needs that and if he wants that. I know that he tried to play with Hazard as a false nine in Chelsea. So I could see something similar to where you have a creative player like Taty who can drop down and really go into any pockets and create, because even Taty has played as an attacking midfielder at times. He's played as a second striker. I mean, Taty can even play out wide if you want him to. If you want to play him out wide and make him kind of play kind of a roaming role underneath the striker coming from wide, he can do that too. So I think Sadi would really enjoy just how much he can bring and that versatility he can bring on that front three.
So the last time we spent big money happened to be on another striker, Vedat Murici, who epically failed at
Right.
Lazio. Funny
Right.
enough, went to La Liga and found himself in a much better position, found some
Yeah.
goals. Also saw himself scoring against Real Madrid. So
Yeah.
for the Laziale that's out there who's a little bit skeptical, who says, okay, this kid scored goals in La Liga. Great. We had Murici, who then went on to La Liga and score a little bit more open of a league.
Yeah.
Maybe feels a little bit burned by the last time we
Yeah.
found ourselves with a striker who was supposed to help spell Cheetah. Also, another parallel was that it was also the year we qualified for Champions League, had a little bit of
It was,
money,
yeah.
found ourselves in very similar position. What would you say to those that are hesitant to make them feel a little bit better that this isn't just a case of us doing the same thing over again and let's expect the worst?
For me, this is what I would say. We talk about intangibles, for example. There's something that data doesn't track and something that it comes with. Taty's story started as he was shunned by his own nationality, by his own nation. He was rejected by Argentinian teams. He was rejected by the youth Argentinian teams, and then was picked up by Chile. It was where in those youth teams in Chile that he started to make a name for himself, started to improve, got a chance in Uruguay, did well in Uruguay, came to New York City. And when he came to New York, he wasn't this prolific scorer and leader that he became. He was more this creative player that was unselfish. Eventually, something in his development clicked where he became the guy in New York City, right? He became the guy in New York City. And he took that load on and he thrived under that responsibility. When David Villa left, it was up to who? Taty to take over David Villa, who had a prolific career in MLS. Yep. And so I will say that when it comes to pressure, when it comes to living up to expectations, so far, Taty has not failed anywhere he's gone. So I think that's encouraging. It's a player that's trending upward. It's a player that in interviews, you'll see that he is completely locked in. He's very strict about his diets. He's very disciplined. He has that work ethic comes from something inner in him that he wants to be the best that he can be. I do think he's a player that steps up when needed to. And like I said, has not failed yet up to this point when needing to step up. And I think that in this situation, he won't be the guy coming in just yet, but there's a good chance. And there's a good chance or maybe possibility. I hope not. But if Cheeto goes down for injury, this last season was rough year for Cheeto in terms of the injury department, or some other players go down and he has to come in and take that role, I think he'll step up to the plate because he has in the past. And he's shown that mentally he's resilient throughout his whole life. And so that was kind of my 2 cents on why we should believe in Taty and why I think he will thrive anywhere that he goes.
Yeah, and look, the games are going to be there for him with or without injury. I mean, Champions League, Coppa Italia. We've got a couple extra cup matches for finishing in second in the table this year. So he's going to have some opportunities. He gets to the club. I believe they're finalizing some visa issues to get him into Aronzo to get some matches. They're actually playing Girona in a preseason match. So,
right.
A nice little opportunity there. Hopefully he's able to make the squad for that. But I think, there's certainly some areas that we can feel positive about. And he's certainly going to find himself with hopefully enough matches to feel good about himself. We saw, obviously, he was a young player. I think he came over to NYCFC as a teenager, 18, 19 years old. And by the time he left having played 17 matches in that last season in which he was then loaned out during that season. But I think it was 17 matches, 13 goals, 2 assists. He found himself once it all clicked. And once he needed to be the goal scorer, he was the best goal scorer in the league. And so, definitely some good things that Laziale could feel excited about.
I'll add this just real quick here. I also think working with Sadi does wonders for attackers in general. I mean, Hazard himself said that he felt the best and felt the most productive under Sadi. We've seen Mertens, players like these guys in the past that have just popped off with Saudi as their coach. If anything, for me, Taty reminds me the most of previous Saudi players to Mertens. For me, that is the most sort of similar comparison of profile. He's a Mertens type player. Mertens is a player that's played across the front three in the past. He's a smaller stature. Taty's a bit taller than him, a little more physical than him. But again, a skillful technical player, good finisher, create chances, can create for his team. And so I do think that another thing that's encouraging, and should be encouraging for us fans with Taty coming in, is that he's working with Saudi, and Saudi has a long history of getting the best out of these attackers.
Yeah, he does, which bodes well. And look, I want to segue in to a little bit more of the hypothetical now, right? We've got our one guy. We know there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and we are far from it in this transfer window. And so we've been linked to a lot of names. Some per usual, some realistic, some absolutely thrown out there by the media. So I put together a list of about 5 or 6 players that are probably, I don't want to say necessarily realistic, but they're the ones that have been brought up the most. So I want to get thoughts on your percentage that you think it happens.
Okay.
And then, if you think it's the right fit, and if not, who would you rather have? So let's start with Zielinski.
Oh, I mean, for me, Zielinski, we talked about it in the past. For me, Zielinski would be an absolute dream. Just someone who can replace Milinkovic Savic's just attacking prowess. For me, Zielinski would be incredible because he has the work rate. He's willing to work and run back. He isn't like this. He isn't like a Luis Alberto where maybe you would say, oh, he's a bit of a liability defensively. He's gotten much better in that aspect. But he's a guy that can come in. He puts in a shift, but he's also just such a creative player. Great with both feet. Comes from a team that also plays a very attacking style. I think it would be a really, really has Serie A experience. Has proven that he can thrive in this league. I mean, for me, that's about as good as you can get.
Yeah. That's one I'm a little torn on because the positives are all the reasons up. We know he can play in this league. We know he's played with Saudi. For me that's huge. I trust in Saudi. Saudi wants him, then I want us to get him. So that's kind of a couple of the checks in the big box is like he's a guy that can produce, he can attack. My concern is the balance that we have when you've got a Luis Alberto, you've got a Zielinski, and then you got Cataldi. And I worry that we start to lose our balance on the defensive end. And we know how important that is to Saudi. We know that it was the biggest reason why it took so long to insert Luis Alberto into the starting 11 last year. He didn't trust having Alberto in there. Alberto, absolute wonders in terms of what he was able to do on both sides of the ball. He grew as a player despite his age. Saudi was able to, and by no means was he like a defensive stalwart, but he grew as a player.
He did,
and you saw him tracking back. You saw him making some defensive plays and getting in there for some tackles. But we still had a guy like Milinkovic Savic who could do it on both sides of the ball. And so,
for sure,
a lineup with Zielinski, Cataldi, and Luis Alberto scares me a little bit. And so I would say I want that signing to happen if we can get maybe a stronger regista. Like, look, having a guy like when we had Lucas Leiva, you have a guy that you knew was going to clean up everything back there, and we just don't have that. And so, I don't know that Cataldi or Avecino is that player. So for me, I'd be excited about it because I know it's somebody that probably gives us a little bit of NOS in the gas tank, like it's an extra boost. But
absolutely,
I do get a little bit concerned. So the next guy on the list, you mentioned a number 6, a potential regista player, young player that can play most positions across the midfield. Samuele Ricci from Torino, young Italian. It seems like over the course of these past few days, it's gotten closer and closer. But we know negotiating with Torino can be often difficult with the relationship between presidents. But thoughts on Samarici? Is that a player you want coming to?
It's a player that I was put it this way. It's a player I would take if there's no other options. Personally, I'm a huge fan of Lazaro Samardzic, the Udinese midfielder that we had been linked with. For me, fits much more that profile. I know you meant like a 6, but we can get away with not having a destroyer 6 if we have, again, a guy like Milinkovic that could play both sides of the ball, right? And someone like Samardzic can do that, also has that good physical profile that we're looking for in a position like that, and can create in the attack as well. So for me, I'd rather us focus more on getting that true box-to-box rather than pushing for some destroyer 6. Okay. I like Cataldi. I think he can do more than enough for the job there. And I think he was excellent last season. Really loved watching him play. But for me personally, priority number 1 is to get that box-to-box, a true box-to-box player.
So what in a perfect world, and I preface this by saying a perfect being also realistic, what does our midfield look like next year?
Oh my goodness. Assuming Luis Alberto starting?
Yeah.
For me, Cataldi, 6. Luis Alberto as a more 8-10 playmaking role. And I mean, Samardzic would be incredible. I mean, for me, that'd be the dream. However, Inter are in for him. Juventus are in for him. I don't know if we could compete for that sort of signature because he is a hot player. He's also Serbian, whatever, it's another kind of similarity to Milinkovic-Savic. But another name that we've talked about, and being American, Yunus Musa, for me, is another great option if we want a player, because it looks like we're willing to bet on a young guy in that position, in that replacement position. It looks like we're looking for a guy. We're okay with someone a little bit younger. In that case, for me, Yunus Musa, he isn't as offensively prolific as Milinkovic-Savic. However, if you have Luis Alberto there pulling the strings, really helping the attack, Musa's a guy who can play that kind of second fiddle to that, right? He has a complete game. Physically, I mean, he's fast, strong, but he also has soft feet. He's great under pressure. He's a player that, again, can compete both ways. Has played at the highest levels, came from the Arsenal Academy. And he's a player that wouldn't cost as much as someone like a Samardzic, for example, because we run on a tight budget at Lazio, right? We don't have unlimited money, so we got to make the most of it. And someone like Yunus Musa, whose price wouldn't be ridiculous, it would cost a decent penny.
I think we could get him for under 20. I think all the links to Milan have him under 20.
Yeah, like 15 to 20 million. The guy who's 21 years old has already played 2 full seasons in La Liga. Played under Gattuso, funny, and Valencia. So for me, he's also another ideal and kind of dream signing that would be realistic and that I think we could compete for.
Yeah, in perfect midfield, I honestly would love to see, with Luis Alberto, I would love to see, and look, this is I would love to see Ricci. I would love to see just a combo of him and Cataldi alternating. Again, Champions League, there's a lot of football to be played. Give me both of those guys. Give me a young Italian. We know Taty is molding this team around young Italians. From a budget standpoint, he is a player that he could be here 10 plus years. Great. We've got that position locked down for a really long time. He's also a player that could be here, 5 years and still hold insane value to sell off.
Sure.
So, give me him to pair with Cataldi, and give me a Yunus Musa. Give me that guy that just a little bit more box to box that can obviously look. Ricci and Alberto are going to be a little bit more offensive minded, though I will say Ricci is pretty balanced. But I'll take a Yunus in that role. But
and real quick,
that it's got to be a Zielinski plus another midfielder that we can feel really good about.
Totally agree. And I will also add this. Another benefit of Yunus is he has an Italian passport and speaks Italian.
Yeah.
So even though he's coming in as a foreigner, he's lived in Italy already, and he can speak the language. So I mean that helps drastically with and again he's worked under an Italian coach as well. So I mean tactically, right when he was coming out from the Arsenal academy, some of his positioning was a little bit off, but I've seen his development at Valencia over these past 2 years under Gattuso as well. He's begotten, and with the U.S. national team at the World Cup, he's become much more positionally disciplined, and he really is a special player and somebody that ticks a lot of boxes, and again has the advantage of being able to ease into the culture of Italy, the team, I think easier than any other foreigner would have, right?
Yep. We've got, unfortunately, one of the left backs that we were linked to in case was signed and secured by Bournemouth. That leaves us in an interesting position of circling back to Pellegrini. Is the latest. I know you and I have talked about him as a player. I, for one, all for bringing him in, particularly because the finances seem to work. Looks like a lot of the discussion is a loan to buy at a much more reduced rate than it was last season. We know his love for the club. That's the big one. You get players like Cataldi, Romagnoli, a Pellegrini, players that are going to fight for the shirt. I think youthful. He's young, ton of opportunity to grow. And I'll go back to the Sadi note. Like Sadi saw him, and while he didn't get a ton of opportunities last year, when he did come in, attacking wise, he created. He's there's been a challenge at Lazio for the past 5-6 years, ever since Sena Lulic started declining. Our search for that left side always proved to fail, and we've had players that couldn't deliver a ball or whip a ball into the box from that position. And one of the things I love about Pellegrini is his ability to just whip a dangerous ball into the box. And when you've got a player like Taty who could make things happen, I think for me it's a big plus. I would say look no further, get this deal done, and bring Pellegrini in. Thoughts on him?
I agree. It's a no-brainer. I don't know. This is a no-brainer. I mean, get it done. In my opinion, it's just an absolute no-brainer. Takes every box you want, bleeds blue, right? Just get it done. And I think part of the reason why he didn't get those minutes was not because Sarri didn't rate him, but because Sarri does have a very particular system, and he likes players to have a strong grasp of that before he throws them out. So I think if he gets a full preseason, or at least, in this case, we'll see what happens. So if he gets a good time in preseason, I think he can really thrive, and he will become the lockdown starter. So for me, again, no brainer.
Yeah. And particularly, important to note, he came in during the winter transfer window. So, which it's hard at any club, but under Sarri, forget it. Your opportunity, unless you're coming in as a known player, a big name, a player that's familiar with the league, that's used to getting minutes and coming up in big moments, it's going to be really hard to find those types of opportunities. So for me, again, no brainer. Like, what are we waiting for here? Let's focus on some of the other areas, because we know that's an absolute area of need. And now the last two pairs, and I'll lump them up together. One seems to be less and less likely to happen. One a little bit more recently, some of the news has picked up, but both playing perhaps similar, not even perhaps, like they're both wingers. One in Berardi, who's been linked to the club since the start of the transfer window and before, and then Callum Hudson-Odoi being the most recent player who's had been linked to Lazio essentially the moment that Sarri came. So thoughts on those two players, and if not one of those two, do you have another player in mind of that ilk? And it looks like we want to bring in another winger. I know that was probably our position of strength last year, but I'm assuming it's a little bit of given Pedro's age, given some of the injuries that we've had. I'm looking at it as we want to invest in somebody a little bit younger. Thoughts there?
I will say just strictly talking about. They call him Cho, CHO in England. I think Chelsea fans call
Okay.
him Cho. I think I
Better
don't
than the
know.
mouthful of Callum Hudson.
Yeah, I'm just not saying all that. But so between like Cho and Berardi, for me, I mean Berardi is for me absolutely no brainer. This is a guy who has had an elite production of many seasons here in Serie A, and um, I mean Sassuolo are playing hardball like always, especially when it comes to Berardi. And while it looks maybe unlikely, if I had to choose for me, Berardi all the way 100%. As for Cho himself, I've watched a lot of Chelsea simply because Pulisic was there. And I watched Pulisic play. I saw Pulisic sometimes sit the bench for Cho, right, or vice versa. And I was never ever sort of impressed by Cho. He's one of those players that yes, he has like the physical tools, has a technical ability, but just that final product, the mentality, it's never there. It's just one of those guys that will forever be, in my opinion, borderline, balancing that line of greatness and okay, and he's just never gonna get to that next level. I don't see Cho getting to that next level. He's had many chances, not just in Premier League. He was at Leverkusen as well, did okay, and there's no signs for me that that's going to change in Serie A. I think if anything, he might struggle even more in Serie A, if anything, because he won't have sort of the extra space that he may have in the Bundesliga. I mean, if any league suited to him is the Bundesliga, and even there, he was okay. The sort of saving grace about this, the sort of saving kind of point in a deal like this, if we did go for Cho, is that Sadi has worked with him, and again, Sadi has gotten a lot out of his wingers. Like Angie is a perfect example of that, where he's really begun to flourish under him as well. And so that would be kind of the only sort of, okay, well, at least, he's working with Sadi again. Right. As for other options, honestly, I have no clue. Wingers are expensive, especially young wingers. And I personally would prefer to stay within the league, getting a winger that has been solid in the league. I don't have any examples. Maybe you have some examples of anybody in the league that.
Yeah, I mean it's tough because like you said, younger players are going to cost a lot more. I think interesting to note that if we bring in another player, I think it's telling of Cancellieri's future. A player that was probably initially kind of thought to be brought in as a Cheeto, as a vice to Cheeto off the bench. Got so few opportunities in that position. Had some opportunities playing on that wing, but if we bring in a player, I think it's interesting I think it's almost pulling the plug on Cancellieri. He's still young. Might need a loan spell to perhaps get some minutes, but I don't know. It's a position I'm not worried about going into the season. Unfortunately with Berardi, I want him absolutely. He would be. He's the type of player that you want to see us signing going into a Champions League campaign. Like right off the bat, I mean, goodness, you've got Zaccagni, you've got Felipe, you got Berardi, you have options there. You got Pedro. Like we're good. Knowing again, we have to be mindful about finances. We just that is a player that has zero resale value, and so if Sassuolo is going to keep playing hardball, it's really tough for Lotito to justify that type of a purchase.
I will say this too. I was just thinking in my head of options like within the league that can come in immediately and make an impact.
I know who you're going to say. About it Spanish?
No. I'm not. Okay. I'm saying Italian. Politano.
Yeah.
And I don't know how realistic that is. However, that's the kind of player I would like to sign. That's the kind of profile, age-wise, experience-wise, that I would like to sign. If we get another winger, going the youth route is great and all, but we saw youth struggle for minutes under Sadi this year. I mean, frankly. And so for me, getting someone like Politano again, was at Napoli, excuse me. I mean, he would be amazing to get. But
I mean,
because I just don't know how realistic that is.
Luca Romero and Cancellieri both by season's
That's right.
end, found themselves
Yeah.
completely out of Sadi's good graces. Now, again, Cancellieri, hopefully an off season, another year of growth. But look,
Yeah.
he's a player that didn't impress in the what was it, the U20.
Hmm.
Um,
World Cup.
yeah, just
Hmm.
didn't come on as a player with Serie A experience. I expected a little bit more out of him.
Yeah.
So we'll see. He certainly has a lot of growing to do. But I want to close it out by saying we've got some work to do. We should feel good about Taty. I think
Hmm.
obviously it's he's not here to come in and take over Cheeto's role.
Yeah.
But I think we both feel good about his ability to come in and produce when called upon.
Absolutely.
Caleb, excited to do a lot more of these.
Yeah.
Folks tuning in, we'll have a lot more. Anytime we've got a signing coming in, we'll look to cover it. We'll look to bring in special guests. This was a good one because both you and I, had that experience with Taty. We'll
Hmm.
bring in guests. We'll do some instant reactions. We're excited to get people to share questions with us, and we'll obviously have some special guests also joining us live. So, anything you want to add?
No, I'm excited. I mean, we have a lot of work to do, but there's also a lot of reason to have hope and to be excited about because we look good on the siding. And I think with a few more additions, we could really compete for Scudetto. I genuinely believe it.
Wow, bold
My
words
hot
on
take.
your
I
first
genuinely
pod.
believe it.
So,
I believe in Sadi, and if we get the transfer market right, if we get the market right, we'll be in a good spot, competing in both on all these different ends.
well,
The
Serie A is
Champions League.
open. Last
Mhm.
year, absolute proof of
Yeah,
of kind of the wild nature of this league, particularly right now. So, yeah,
yeah,
lots to look forward to, but lots to get done. So,
yeah.
as always, everybody, thanks for tuning in, and sempre forza Lazio.